So I see a lot of advice on what it takes to manifest. I believe that everyone has an opinion and a rule, and everyone is going to preach what worked for them. But I don't see enough approaches that are truly embodied and trauma informed. For example, one thing that I see a lot of people debating is whether or not you can manifest when you have trauma. And the question is obviously complex, and the answer is as complex because it's not necessarily that, like, it's not that you cannot manifest when you have trauma, but it's also about the type of trauma that you have. Because certain trauma responses, and a trauma response is the way in which you've learned to cope with traumatic events and to survive them. Certain trauma responses can make it harder for you to manifest because they're going to automatically put you in the frequency where it's just harder to manifest. For example, there are people that cope with trauma by not caring that much. People with an avoidant attachment. 111, I was just looking now, the confirmation. So there are people with an avoidant attachment that learned to not care so much to cope with distress and pain. I believe that they can have an easier time manifesting. So this is also a type of trauma, but they can have an easier time manifesting than those with an anxious attachment that are more they are more prone to be in this space of grasping onto things and adding a lot of resistance because they've learned to overcare in order to survive. They've learned to be hyper vigilant, while the avoidant is under vigilant. They're like, I don't care. They're just like overly detached. The anxious attachment and the anxiously attached is going to be overly attached. And so obviously that they are both trauma responses and both people are in trauma, but not both these like tendencies are going to affect us in the same way. And I'm also not saying that for people with an anxious attachment it's going to be impossible to manifest. It's just that when we understand our tendencies and when we've learned that, and when we understand that in order to survive, we've learned to overcare and be hypervigilant and overly attached to our goals, to our relationships, to the money that we are already making, we already understand what kind of tendencies kick in and how those tendencies can make the manifestation game slower, right? Manifestation is no longer a word that I necessarily love to use, but in this context, it just makes sense for those that are new to this work. So these are huge differences and huge pieces of understanding that come from the true embodiment of this work, and I believe that they would make such a big difference if they would be taught in a regular, on a regular basis in every manifestation process. Because it's so easy to say you cannot manifest when you have trauma, or you can manifest when you have trauma, but you're going to presume that everyone has the same privilege and that everyone's tendencies are going to influence their manifestation game the same, and that's simply not true. And I believe that ultimately it's about understanding our tendencies so that we know how to work with them, and also learning how to use these tendencies to our advantage. Because when we understand, okay, I'm anxiously attached, I tend to overcare and be hypervigilant, but I also have these traits that someone with an avoidant attachment doesn't have. We are extremely driven, we are very motivated, and we are always going to mobilize to make our goals happen. We are the goal getters. We are not going to rest until they happen. So we have a huge advantage here. If we know how to use it for our own good, we're going to thrive. Because we understand that, yes, maybe people with a more avoidant attachment and even secure attachment, they may not be in this over grasping, but at the same time they can struggle more with motivation. Especially people with an avoidant attachment can be a bit too laid back, and they can struggle with finding that motivation to make things happen, to go after their goals, and so on. And these small shifts in perception are going to make a whole lot of difference, because many times we take on advice from the internet, very general advice from people that are probably not trauma informed, and this advice may not apply to us, and even more so, it can make us enter this insane inner conflict because we are like, okay, I'm applying that, but it doesn't work for me. And this is the next level of that work, truly understanding how do you work, what are the things that you are dealing with, what are the tendencies that may get in the way, and how can you use those tendencies to your advantage, what are also the strengths, because we don't only have trauma, we also have strength, we also have resiliency, we also have skills that we can use that are the flip side of trauma. And I believe that when we focus more on the resources that these trauma responses gave us, that's when we begin embodying more self-confidence, and we stop comparing ourselves with other people that just work differently. Because the worst thing we can do as mentors is to assume that everyone works in the same way. That's the worst presumption that we can have, because that's when people begin feeling lonely, they don't feel supported, and then they feel lost, and they go into self-blame. And we say we are healers that are here to help people, but we absolutely ignore the responsibility for not cultivating the understanding of these differences. And I say this with all the love. I say this because a lot of people, we see on the internet these like 100,000 modalities on how to manifest and how to do this, 100,000 programs. And it's very hard to fully understand what's beyond social media, what's within these programs. And like I share what's in my beta work, and I share this wisdom so that you can have that type of understanding, and so that you can begin making choices that are more attuned for your needs. Because you're going to be, oh, I actually need support that matches my attachment style, or matches my like makes me understand my trauma and helps me use my trauma to my advantage in the manifestation game, right? That's what I want for you. That's what I do with my clients, and that's why I'm here. This is not a game where you come into my world and I shame you for how you are, or I tell you that like, I don't know, this worked for me, I don't know why it doesn't work for you. It worked for all of these other people, and like it just doesn't work for you, so you may be to blame. The first step when someone would find roadblocks in an approach would be for me to understand how are they unique, and even allow them to create a new like branch in my approach. And I have to understand how someone with ADHD can manifest, how someone with trauma can manifest, how someone with an anxious attachment can manifest. These are all things that I believe I am kind of like I am responsible for as a practitioner that considers themselves here to support others and here to actually change my little world. I'm not saying that I'm going to change the whole world, but I definitely want the people that come in contact with my world to feel truly supported. So I hope that this is going to be supportive as well for you. I hope that it brings a bit more clarity and context into what may be the next step in your manifestation game, and how this embodied trauma-informed work actually looks like.